The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council stretched for nearly a mile in every direction. Its curved walls rose toward a ceiling that displayed the live image of distant stars, and its floor was made from polished stone on a dozen different worlds. Representatives from 12 species sat in tiered rows that circled a central platform, and on that platform stood a single human woman who refused to let her hands shake. Ambassador Cole had served Earth's diplomatic corps for 23 years. She had negotiated trade agreements with the and cultural exchanges with the Silicon-based. She had smiled through insults and maintained her composure through threats, but nothing in her long career had prepared her for this moment. High Arbiter of the Dominion rose from his elevated seat and looked down at her with 4 crimson eyes. His scaled body gleamed under the artificial light, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. He told that the Council had reached a unanimous decision. Humanity had expanded beyond its rightful boundaries. Humanity had claimed worlds that belonged to established powers. Humanity had refused to acknowledge its proper place in the galactic hierarchy. Listened without interruption. She had learned long ago that interrupting was the fastest way to end a negotiation. Continued. He said that Earth had 30 standard cycles to surrender its outer colony worlds. The planets of New Horizons, Rest, and the mining stations of the Aldrin Belt would be transferred to Council administration. Human settlers would be relocated to Earth and its immediate solar system. Failure to comply would result in military action. The chamber fell silent. 12 species watched Cole, waiting for her to beg or plead or offer desperate compromises. That was what young species did when confronted with the power of the Council. They folded. They surrendered. They accepted their place. Took a slow breath. She asked if she might have time to consult with her government before providing a formal response. His 4 eyes narrowed. He had expected tears or anger, not calm professionalism. He granted her 10 cycles, believing that this was merely a delay before the inevitable surrender. Thanked him with perfect diplomatic courtesy. She turned and walked toward the chamber's exit, her footsteps echoing in the vast space. As she passed the delegation, she heard Intelligence Minister whisper something to his aide. The translation software in her earpiece picked up his words. He said that humans were such fragile creatures, and that it was almost sad to watch them pretend they had options. Did not react. She kept walking until she reached the massive doors, and then she stepped through them and let them close behind her. Her shuttle waited in the diplomatic hangar, a small vessel that looked ancient compared to the sleek ships of the Council species. She boarded it and sealed the hatch and sat in the pilot's seat for a long moment before allowing herself to close her eyes. The communication console beeped. She opened a secure channel to Earth, and the face of Admiral Henry Shaw appeared on the screen. He was a man in his 60s with gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen both war and peace. He asked her what the Council had decided. Told him everything, the ultimatum, the 30 cycles, the list of worlds they demanded. Shaw listened without expression. When she finished, he nodded slowly. He said that they had always known this day might come. The Council had tolerated humanity for 40 years because they believed humans were useful but ultimately harmless. Now that human colonies had grown prosperous and human technology had advanced, the Council saw them as competition rather than servants. Asked what Earth would do. Shaw told her that humanity had been preparing for this possibility since the day they first encountered the Council, and realized how little respect the established powers had for younger species. He said that Earth had spent 2 decades building something in secret, something that would change the balance of power in the galaxy if it ever became necessary to reveal it. Felt her heart beat faster. She had heard rumors over the years, whispers about hidden research facilities and classified construction projects. She had dismissed them as wishful thinking, the kind of stories that people told themselves when they felt powerless. Shaw told her that the rumors were true. He said that 12 years ago, A deep space exploration vessel had discovered something in an uncharted system. An ancient ship, millions of years old, built by a species that had vanished long before the current council races had evolved. The technology inside that ship was beyond anything the galaxy had seen in recorded history. Asked why Earth had never revealed this discovery, Shaw smiled, but there was no humor in it. He said that humanity had learned a hard lesson when they first made contact with the Council. They had approached with open hands and honest intentions, and the Council had immediately begun treating them as inferiors. Earth's leaders realized that revealing advanced technology would only make them a target, so they kept the discovery secret and spent 12 years studying it and integrating it into human infrastructure without anyone noticing. Understood now. Earth had been preparing for this confrontation not for months but for over a decade. The Council believed they were threatening a weak and primitive species, but they were wrong. Shaw told her to remain on Prime as an observer. He wanted eyes inside the Council chamber when things began to change. He said that he was activating something called Protocol Lighthouse, and that she would understand what that meant soon enough. The communication ended. Sat alone in her shuttle, processing what she had learned. For 23 years she had represented a species that the galaxy viewed as insignificant. She had swallowed insults and accepted dismissive treatment because she believed that diplomacy required patience. Now she realized that her patience had been part of a larger strategy, one that extended far beyond her own career. Across human space, things began to move. On colony worlds and space stations, in orbital shipyards and hidden facilities buried beneath barren moons, orders were received and acknowledged. Ships that had been waiting in silence powered up their engines. Officers who had trained for years in classified programs finally received the missions they had been promised. Admiral Shaw stood in Earth's orbital command center and watched the status reports flow across his screens. 17 battle groups confirmed their readiness. Defense networks came online around every human world. Communication relays established secure connections that no Council technology could intercept. He thought about the Council delegates sitting in their grand chamber, confident in their power and certain of their victory. They believed they were dealing with frightened children who would surrender at the first sign of threat. They had no idea what was coming. Shaw sent a single message to all human military commanders. It contained only 3 words: Protocol Lighthouse active. On Prime, Cole returned to the Grand Assembly Hall and took her seat in the observer gallery. The Council delegates ignored her, already discussing how they would divide the spoils of humanity's conquered worlds. High Arbiter spoke of which species would receive which planets, treating the outcome as a foregone conclusion. Watched them and said nothing. She thought about all the times she had been dismissed and underestimated, all the moments when alien diplomats had looked at her with contempt because she was human. She thought about how satisfying it would be when they finally realized their mistake. The countdown had begun. 10 cycles remained before Earth's response was due, and the Galactic Council had no idea that they had just made the worst miscalculation in their history. Commander Lisa Grant had served aboard military vessels for 15 years, but she had never seen anything like the orders that appeared on her screen that morning. She sat in the captain's chair of the carrier vessel Steadfast and read the encrypted message 3 times before she fully understood what it meant. Protocol Lighthouse was active. Her squadron of 18 ships was to move to coordinates in deep space and await further instructions. They were to maintain complete communication silence and avoid all contact with Council vessels. Most importantly, they were to prepare for combat operations against a force that outnumbered them by a factor of 40 to 1. Lisa called her senior officers to the bridge and explained the situation. Her first officer, a veteran named Daniel Park, asked how they were supposed to fight an armada with 18 ships. Lisa told him that they were not going to fight the armada directly. They were going to do something far more effective. The Steadfast and her sister ships altered course and engaged their engines at maximum speed. Within 6 hours, they had left the patrol routes that the Council expected human vessels to follow. Within 12 hours, they had entered a region of space that Council navigation charts marked as empty and worthless. The region was not empty. Hidden among the dust clouds and asteroid fields were supply caches that human crews had been building for years, fuel depots disguised as natural formations, weapon stores buried beneath the surfaces of dead moons, communication relays so small and so well shielded that no Council sensor could detect them. Lisa's squadron and then moved deeper into the darkness between stars. They activated systems that had been installed during the last refit, systems that no Council engineer had ever inspected. The hulls of the human ships began to shimmer, and then seemed to fold inward upon themselves until they vanished entirely from sight and sensor. The technology was called light-bending camouflage, and it was derived from the ancient vessel that Earth had discovered 12 years ago. No current species in the galaxy possessed anything like it. To Council sensors, Lisa's 18 ships simply ceased to exist. Meanwhile, on Prime, the Council continued its preparations for war. High Arbiter addressed the assembly and announced that the combined armada would number 800 vessels from 6 different species. The Dominion was contributing 300 warships, the Combine 200, and the remaining 300 came from 4 allied powers who saw an opportunity to claim human territory. Intelligence Minister presented his analysis of Earth's military capabilities. His data showed that humanity possessed approximately 200 combat-ready vessels, most of them small patrol craft designed for border security rather than fleet engagement. He estimated that the conquest would take less than 15 cycles once the armada reached human space. Cole sat in the observer gallery and listened to every word. She watched the Council delegates congratulate themselves on their wisdom and foresight. She watched them divide human worlds among themselves as if the war were already won. And she watched 4 crimson eyes gleam with anticipation as he described the glory that awaited the fleet. She wanted to stand up and tell them how wrong they were. She wanted to see their expressions when they learned the truth. But Admiral Shaw had ordered her to observe and report, nothing more. Her time to speak would come later. The armada launched on schedule. 800 vessels of war departed from staging areas across Council space and converged on the corridor, the main passage into human territory. Their commanders expected to encounter resistance at the border, perhaps a desperate last stand by outmatched human defenders. They found nothing. The human border stations were empty. The patrol vessels that normally guarded the corridor had withdrawn. The armada passed through without firing a single shot, and High Commander declared this proof of human cowardice. The fleet continued toward the colony world of New Horizon, the largest and most prosperous of Earth's outer settlements, planned to capture it intact and use it as a demonstration of Council power. The humans who lived there would become subjects of the Dominion, working in mines and factories to fuel ambitions. New Horizon was also empty. The orbital stations had been abandoned, their systems powered down, and their docking bays dark. Surface scans revealed that the colony below had been evacuated, its 2 million inhabitants transported to safety before the armada arrived. His confidence began to waver. He had expected fear and desperation, not organized withdrawal. He ordered his fleet to continue deeper into human space, determined to find something worth conquering. That was when Lisa Grant struck. Her squadron emerged from the void like ghosts materializing from shadow. One moment, the supply convoy trailing behind the armada was alone in space, and the next moment it was surrounded by human warships that had appeared from nowhere. The engagement lasted less than 4 minutes. Lisa's ships targeted fuel transports and ammunition carriers with surgical precision, ignoring the escort vessels entirely. By the time the escorts understood what was happening, 17 supply ships had been reduced to expanding clouds of debris, and the human squadron had vanished again. Reports reached flagship within the hour. He demanded explanations from his intelligence officers, who had no explanations to give. Their sensors had detected nothing before the attack and nothing afterward. The human ships had appeared and disappeared as if they existed outside normal space. Lisa did not stop with one attack. Over the next 48 hours, her squadron struck 12 more times at different points along the Armada's supply line. Communication relays were destroyed. Scout vessels vanished without distress calls. A fuel depot that the Armada was counting on for resupply exploded before their advance elements could reach it. The great Armada of the Galactic Council found itself blind and hungry. 800 warships still possessed overwhelming firepower, but firepower meant nothing without fuel to move and supplies to sustain operations. Had planned for a quick conquest against an inferior enemy. He had not planned for a ghost war against opponents who could strike anywhere without warning. On Prime, the Council received increasingly frustrated reports. The mood in the assembly chamber shifted from confidence to concern. Intelligence Minister admitted that his analysis had failed to account for capabilities that humanity apparently possessed but had never revealed. Cole rose from her seat in the observer gallery and walked to the central platform. The chamber fell silent as delegates turned to look at her. She said that Earth had requested dialogue and negotiation 10 cycles ago. She said that the Council had chosen war instead. She said that humanity had never wanted this conflict, but was fully prepared to defend itself. High Arbiter's holographic image appeared in the chamber, transmitted from his flagship. His scales had lost some of their gleam, and his 4 eyes showed the strain of sleepless cycles. He demanded to know what technology Earth was using. He demanded that reveal the secret of the invisible ships. Smiled. She told him that humanity had spent 40 years being underestimated by the Council. She told him that Earth had learned to smile and nod while building strength in secret. She told him that the Armada had not yet seen a fraction of what humanity could do. The communication ended. Ordered his fleet to continue toward the Sol system, convinced that whatever tricks the humans possessed, they could not stand against 800 warships in direct combat. He was about to discover how wrong that assumption was. Far ahead of the advancing Armada, Admiral Shaw reviewed the latest intelligence reports and prepared for the next phase of the operation. The Council had committed their forces to a path they could not easily abandon. Now it was time to show them exactly what they were walking into. He sent new orders to Lisa Grant and to the other commanders who waited in the darkness between stars. The Ghost War had served its purpose. The real confrontation was about to begin. The Armada pushed forward through empty space, and with each passing hour, High Commander grew more certain that he was walking into a trap. His fleet had lost 63 vessels to the invisible human attackers. Not warships mostly, but the support craft that kept an Armada functioning. Fuel tankers and supply freighters and communication relays, all destroyed by enemies who struck without warning and vanished without trace. His captains were becoming nervous. The contingent had already requested permission to withdraw their forces and reconsider the campaign. The smaller allied species were murmuring about betrayal and bad intelligence. Only the remained fully committed, and even among his own people, could sense the growing doubt. He refused to turn back. The humiliation of retreating from a species that had achieved faster-than-light travel less than 50 years ago was unthinkable. They had dominated their region of space for 3,000 years. They had conquered dozens of species and built an empire that stretched across 100 star systems. They would not be defeated by primitives who had barely learned to leave their own planet. The Armada entered the outer reaches of human space, passing through the scattered stations and mining platforms of the Aldrin Belt. These too had been evacuated, their personnel and equipment removed before the Council forces arrived. ordered his ships to destroy the abandoned stations anyway, hoping that the destruction would send a message to the humans who had fled. His sensors detected nothing ahead except empty space and the distant light of Earth's sun. The human fleet that intelligence had estimated at 200 vessels was nowhere to be found. Perhaps they had retreated to defend there. Perhaps they were hiding among the asteroids and moons of the outer system. Or perhaps they were preparing something that could not yet imagine. The Armada crossed the orbit of the gas giant that humans called Neptune. They passed the ringed world of Saturn. They approached the massive sphere of Jupiter with its swirling storms and its dozens of moons. And then, finally, their long-range sensors detected something ahead. Studied the readings and felt his confidence return. The human fleet was waiting near Earth, exactly where he had expected them to be. His tactical officers began counting vessels and calculating engagement parameters. They identified carriers and cruisers and patrol craft, all arranged in a defensive formation around the blue and green world that these primitives called home. The count reached 200 and kept climbing, 300, 400, 500. Tactical officer fell silent, his tentacles frozen over his console as the numbers continued to rise. 1,000, 2,000, 2,500. Demanded an explanation. His officers had none to give. The sensors were functioning correctly. The readings were accurate. Surrounding Earth and its single large moon were more than 3,000 human warships, each one larger and more advanced than anything the Council had ever recorded. The Armada stopped. 800 vessels hung motionless in space, while their commanders stared at screens that showed them an impossible sight. The young species they had come to conquer possessed a fleet that outnumbered their own by nearly 4-1. Admiral Shaw's face appeared on every communication screen in the Council Armada. He was calm and composed, his gray hair neat and his uniform crisp. He addressed directly, captain to commander, and his voice carried no anger or triumph, only quiet resolve. He said that Earth had never wanted war. He said that humanity had approached the galaxy with hope and openness, only to be treated with contempt by species who measured worth in age and military power. He said that Earth had learned from that experience and had spent 2 decades preparing for the moment when the Council's contempt turned to aggression. Shaw told that the fleet before him was real. 3,200 vessels, built in hidden shipyards across human space, assembled from components manufactured on 100 different worlds. The technology that powered them came from sources the Council could not imagine, sources that predated the rise of every current galactic species by millions of years. He offered a choice. The Armada could withdraw from human space and return to Council territory. There would be no pursuit and no retaliation. Earth sought only to be left in peace, to govern its own worlds without tribute or interference. The alternative was a battle that the Council could not win, a battle that would cost thousands of lives on both sides and accomplish nothing except destruction. Scales had turned pale. His 4 eyes moved from screen to screen, confirming what he already knew. His tactical officers were calculating engagement scenarios, and every calculation ended the same way. The Armada would be destroyed within hours if it attacked. The human fleet was simply too large and too well positioned. But his people had never retreated from an enemy. His ancestors had conquered world after world through sheer determination and refusal to accept defeat. He could not be the first high commander in 3,000 years to order a withdrawal. He demanded more time to consider the offer. Shaw granted him 6 hours. The communication ended, and the 2 fleets faced each other across the darkness of space. On Prime, the Council watched the confrontation unfold through real-time communications from the Armada. The Grand Assembly had fallen into chaos. Delegates shouted accusations at each other, blaming Intelligence Minister for his failed assessments and blaming for his aggressive posture. The Combine formally their support for the campaign, and demanded that their 200 vessels be allowed to return home. Cole stood at the edge of the assembly floor and watched the council tear itself apart. She felt no satisfaction, only weariness. So much suffering could have been avoided if the council had simply treated humanity as equals from the beginning. Instead, they had chosen arrogance and intimidation, and now they were paying the price. She activated her communication device and contacted Admiral Shaw. She told him that the Council alliance was fracturing. The wanted out. Two of the smaller species were already preparing to blame for the entire disaster. If Shaw could delay the confrontation for a few more hours, the armada might collapse without a shot being fired. Shaw thanked her for the intelligence. He told her that humanity had no desire to destroy the armada. The ships carried crews, living beings who were following orders from leaders who had made terrible decisions. If there was a way to end this without massive loss of life, he would take it. Lisa Grant's squadron emerged from concealment and took position alongside the main human fleet. Her ships had been harrying the armada for days, and her crews were exhausted but determined. She reported to Admiral Shaw that all vessels were combat-ready and awaiting orders. Shaw told her to hold position. The next few hours would determine whether this confrontation ended in negotiation or battle. He hoped for negotiation, but he was prepared for either outcome. The 6 hours passed slowly. On the bridge of his flagship, communicated with his captains and advisors. The officers wanted to attack, certain that their warrior heritage would carry them to victory despite the odds. The Allied captains wanted to withdraw, unwilling to sacrifice their ships and crews for pride. The armada began to break apart. 3 vessels changed course without authorization and began accelerating toward the edge of the system. Others followed. Within 2 hours, nearly 200 ships had abandoned the formation, their captains choosing survival over loyalty to a doomed campaign. Watched his great armada dissolve and felt something he had never experienced before. Defeat, not in battle but in the minds and hearts of those who had once followed him without question. The humans had won without firing a single shot at his main fleet. They had won by being patient and prepared, by hiding their strength until the perfect moment to reveal it. He opened a channel to Admiral Shaw and spoke words that no commander had ever spoken. He requested formal negotiations to end the conflict. Shaw agreed. The confrontation that could have killed thousands ended with a conversation between 2 commanders who understood that war served neither of their peoples. The real challenge would come next, when the time arrived to build a peace that would last. The negotiations began aboard a neutral station in the space between the 2 fleets. Admiral Shaw chose a small team to accompany him, including Commander Lisa Grant, whose tactical brilliance during the Ghost War had earned her a place at the table. High Commander brought his senior captains and a diplomatic advisor who looked almost as exhausted as his military commander. They met in a conference room with transparent walls that showed the stars outside. Earth's fleet hung in the distance, a wall of metal and light that reminded everyone present of the stakes involved. The Council Armada, reduced by defections to less than 500 vessels, waited on the opposite side. Shaw spoke first. He told that Earth had no territorial ambitions beyond its current holdings. Humanity wanted trade and cooperation with the Council species, not conquest or revenge. The war had been forced upon them by the Council's ultimatum, and now that the military situation had changed, Earth was willing to forget the past and build something new. Listened with his 4 eyes focused on Shaw's face. The human admiral was older than him by standards, but there was no sign of weakness or uncertainty in his bearing. This was a commander who had planned for decades, who had built an empire in secret while the galaxy dismissed his species as irrelevant, found himself respecting the human despite everything that had happened. He asked what terms Earth proposed. Shaw laid out the human position. First, the Council would recognize Earth and its colonies as sovereign territory, free from tribute obligations or military interference. Second, Earth would receive full membership in any reformed galactic governing body, with voting rights equal to any other species. Third, all Council species would agree to mutual non-aggression pacts that prohibited the kind of intimidation that had started this conflict. In exchange, Earth offered something unexpected. Shaw produced a data chip and placed it on the table. He told that the chip contained research derived from human study of the ancient vessel they had discovered. Not weapons technology, but medical advances that could cure diseases affecting multiple Council species. Agricultural innovations that could double food production on marginal worlds. Energy systems that were cleaner and more efficient than anything currently in use. Humanity was offering to share the benefits of its secret research with the species that had tried to conquer them. Asked why, after everything the Council had done, after the threats and the contempt and the attempted invasion, why would humanity give anything to their former enemies? Shaw smiled. He said that revenge was easy but ultimately pointless. Destroying the Council armada would have been simple. Earth's fleet could have annihilated the invaders and then swept through Council space, conquering world after world until humanity ruled the galaxy. But that path led only to more conflict, more destruction, and more generations growing up knowing nothing but war. Humanity wanted something better. They wanted to prove that a species could be powerful without being cruel. They wanted to show the galaxy that strength and generosity were not opposites. Most importantly, they wanted their children to inherit a universe where different species worked together instead of fighting endlessly for dominance. Was silent for a long moment. His entire life had been built on the belief that power came from domination. His species had risen to prominence through conquest, and he had always assumed that all species must follow the same path. The idea that a people could choose cooperation over competition, that they could offer gifts to their enemies instead of demanding tribute, was foreign to everything he knew. But he was also practical. The Council armada was beaten. The alliance was shattered. They had already begun withdrawing their remaining ships, and the smaller species were sending private messages asking how they could make peace with Earth before they dragged them into further disaster. He accepted the terms in principle and asked to communicate with the Council on Prime. On the station world, Cole received word of the negotiations and immediately requested access to the Grand Assembly. The delegates were reluctant to admit her, still processing the shock of their military defeat, but she insisted. She told them that Admiral Shaw had made an offer that could transform the galaxy, and they needed to hear it from a human voice. She stood on the central platform where she had received the Council's ultimatum only weeks before. The same delegates who had looked at her with contempt now watched her with a mixture of fear and uncertainty. High Arbiter's seat was empty, his holographic presence joining from the negotiation station. Told them about Shaw's proposal. She explained the technology sharing and the trade agreements and the mutual non-aggression pacts. She described a future where Council species and humanity worked together on scientific research and cultural exchange, and the exploration of the vast unknown regions of the galaxy. The delegate interrupted. He demanded to know what guarantee Earth could offer that they would not use their superior fleet to conquer the Council once the current crisis was forgotten. How could anyone trust a species that had hidden such power for so long? Acknowledged the question as fair. She said that trust was earned through actions, not promises. Earth would begin by sharing the medical and agricultural technology without conditions. The non-aggression pacts would include verification mechanisms that allowed all parties to monitor military movements. And most importantly, humanity would demonstrate its good faith by reducing its visible military presence once stability was achieved. The assembly debated for hours. Old alliances fractured, and new ones formed as delegates calculated their positions. The humiliated but still powerful gradually accepted that their dominance was ending. They saw an opportunity to increase their influence through economic cooperation rather than military strength. The smaller species simply wanted the fighting to stop. By the end of the session, a preliminary agreement had been reached. The Council would accept Earth's terms and begin negotiations for a comprehensive treaty. The Armada would withdraw from human space immediately. A new governing body would be formed with human participation, replacing the old council structure that had enabled so much abuse. Sent word to Admiral Shaw. The diplomatic phase of the victory was complete. Lisa Grant stood on the observation deck of her ship and watched the Council Armada begin its withdrawal. Ships that had come to conquer were leaving in defeat, but there was no celebration among the human crews. They understood that the hard work was just beginning. Building peace was more difficult than winning wars, and the galaxy was full of old grudges and suspicious minds. She thought about the crews on those retreating ships. Most of them were ordinary beings who had followed orders from leaders who had made terrible decisions. They had families waiting for them on distant worlds, children who did not understand why their parents had gone to fight a war against a species they had never met. Those crews would go home now, and perhaps some of them would think about what had happened and question the assumptions they had been taught. Admiral Shaw joined her on the observation deck. He looked tired but satisfied. He told her that the first phase was over, but the real challenge lay ahead. Humanity had proven its strength. Now it needed to prove its character. Lisa asked what came next. Shaw said that they would begin withdrawing the hidden fleet to shipyards for maintenance and crew rotation. They would open trade negotiations with species who had been excluded from council power. They would send teachers and doctors and engineers to worlds that had never received help from the established powers. And slowly, over years and decades, they would build a reputation as a species that used its strength to help rather than harm. It would not be easy. There would be setbacks and betrayals and moments of doubt. But Shaw believed that humanity was capable of becoming something the galaxy had never seen before, a great power that chose compassion over conquest. The last council ship disappeared into the distance, and the human fleet began standing down from combat alert. The war was over. The future was beginning. 3 weeks had passed since the Armada's withdrawal, and the galaxy was still adjusting to its new reality. Trade routes that had been closed for decades were reopening. Diplomatic channels that had never existed were being established. Species that had lived under council domination for centuries were cautiously exploring what freedom might mean. Admiral Shaw stood in the orbital command center above Earth and reviewed reports from across human space. The colonies were returning to normal operations. Evacuated civilians were going home. The massive fleet that had defended Earth was dispersing to shipyards for maintenance, its crews finally getting the rest they had earned. The work of building peace continued. Every day brought new negotiations, new complications, and new opportunities. The Combine had proposed a joint research initiative to study the ancient technology that Earth had discovered. The smaller council species were requesting humanitarian assistance for worlds that had been neglected for generations. Even some commanders were reaching out through back channels, curious about a species that had beaten them so thoroughly, and then offered friendship instead of vengeance. Cole returned to Prime for the formal treaty signing. The Grand Assembly had been transformed. The tiered seating that had once emphasized hierarchy was being replaced with a circular arrangement where all species sat as equals. The massive display that had shown distant stars now showed images from dozens of worlds, a reminder that the galaxy was vast and diverse, and that no single species could claim ownership of it all. She took her seat among the delegates and felt the weight of the moment. 40 years ago, humanity had made first contact with alien life and had been immediately relegated to the lowest tier of galactic society. Today, Earth was signing a treaty that would reshape the political landscape of known space. High Arbiter entered the chamber and walked to the central platform. He had aged visibly in the weeks since the confrontation. His scales were duller, and his 4 eyes carried a heaviness that had not been there before. He had spent 3,000 years believing that the way was the only path to greatness, and now he was being forced to consider alternatives. He addressed the assembly. He said that the Dominion had made a grave error in judgment. They had looked at humanity and seen only a young species without proper respect for established powers. They had failed to recognize the determination and ingenuity that humans possessed. Most importantly, they had failed to understand that true strength was not measured by the ability to conquer, but by the wisdom to choose cooperation. The words did not come easily. Could see the struggle in his posture, the pride of a lifetime warring with the reality of defeat. But he spoke them anyway, and the assembly listened in silence. Announced that the Dominion was formally withdrawing its claim to human territory. He endorsed the new treaty and committed his species to peaceful relations with Earth. And then he did something that no leader had done in recorded history. He apologized. He told directly that the Council had treated humanity with contempt from the first moment of contact. They had dismissed human culture and human achievements and human potential because they could not imagine that a young species might possess qualities that older civilizations had forgotten. He said that they would work to become better neighbors and better partners, even if it took generations to rebuild trust. Stood and walked to the platform. She faced and offered her hand in the human gesture of greeting and respect. He hesitated for a moment, unfamiliar with the custom, and then extended his own clawed hand to meet hers. The assembly erupted in a chaos of reactions. Some delegates cheered while others sat in stunned silence. The image of a human and a shaking hands was transmitted across the galaxy, a symbol of a new era that few had imagined possible. The treaty was signed that day. It established a new galactic assembly with rotating leadership and equal voting rights for all member species. It created protocols for peaceful dispute resolution and mutual defense against external threats. It opened borders for trade and travel and cultural exchange, and it included provisions for sharing the ancient technology that Earth had discovered, ensuring that its benefits would reach every world that needed them. Lisa Grant watched the ceremony from her quarters aboard the Steadfast. Her ship was docked at a repair station, finally receiving the maintenance it needed after weeks of combat operations. Her crew was scattered across nearby facilities, sleeping in real beds and eating fresh food for the first time in far too long. She thought about the journey that had brought them here, the long years of secret preparation, the tense days of the Ghost War, the moment when the human fleet had revealed itself and changed everything. So many things could have gone wrong, so many decision points where a different choice might have led to disaster. But they had made it. Humanity had faced the greatest test in its short history as a spacefaring species and had emerged not just victorious but transformed. They had proven that they could defend themselves against overwhelming odds. More importantly, they had proven that they could win without becoming the thing they had fought against. Admiral Shaw retired 6 months after the treaty signing. He said that his work was done, and that younger leaders needed to take humanity forward into its new future. His final act as fleet commander was promoting Lisa Grant to the rank of admiral, recognizing her role in the campaign that had changed galactic history. Lisa accepted the promotion with mixed feelings. She had never sought power or recognition. She had simply done her duty when her people needed her. But she understood that the galaxy was watching humanity closely, looking for signs of how they would use their newfound influence. Someone needed to ensure that Earth's military remained a force for protection rather than conquest. Cole remained on Prime as Earth's permanent ambassador to the new Galactic Assembly. She spent her days navigating the complex politics of a dozen species, building relationships and solving disputes before they could escalate into conflicts. It was exhausting work, but she found it deeply satisfying. One evening, as she walked through the corridors of the assembly building, she encountered High Arbiter. He was alone, studying a display that showed the current state of galactic trade routes. Human ships were now traveling freely through space that had once been closed to them, carrying goods and ideas and people to worlds across known space. noticed her approach and turned to face her. He said that he had been studying human history, trying to understand how such a young species had accomplished what they had. He had learned about the wars humans had fought among themselves, the terrible weapons they had created, and the suffering they had endured. But he had also learned about their capacity for rebuilding, for forgiveness, and for hope. He told that they had forgotten those qualities long ago. They had become so focused on dominance that they had lost the ability to imagine any other way of existing. Perhaps, he said, that was why humanity had defeated them so completely. The humans remembered what it meant to start over and build something new. Smiled, she told him that humanity had a saying that seemed appropriate for the moment. She said that people should never mistake kindness for weakness. Considered those words, he asked what they meant. Explained that humans chose to be kind because they believed it was right, not because they lacked the strength to be cruel. The fleet that had surrounded Earth proved that humanity could destroy anyone who threatened them. The treaty they had offered proved that they preferred to create rather than destroy. Both things were true at the same time, and understanding that was essential to understanding humanity. Nodded slowly. He said that the galaxy had much to learn from this young species. Agreed, and then she suggested that perhaps the galaxy had some things to teach humanity as well. Knowledge flowed in both directions, after all. That was what cooperation meant. They stood together in silence for a moment, two representatives of species that had been enemies only weeks before, watching the stars turn slowly outside the observation windows. The future was uncertain, full of challenges and opportunities that no one could predict. But for the first time in 40 years, that future belonged to humanity as much as anyone else. The Galactic Council had tried to force Earth into submission. Instead, they had awakened something they never expected, and the galaxy would never be the same.